Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning,
Morning.
everyone.
Russ, is that you on the phone?
It's Jonathan.
Oh, Jonathan. Okay, I couldn't tell.
I'm okay if you mistake me for Russ.
So my brain's still waking up this morning. So I was like, well, I think that was a male voice. I'll just pick one.
Good morning.
Morning. This Read AI, we talked about it in the big HSAC meeting. Is that some like bot that listens and then takes notes?
Yeah, it's a Zoom app
Okay.
that like automatically record, like it just transcribes the meeting. And then it takes like key points or action items out of the meeting.
Oh, I love that. Morning. Last time I was like, I'll ask in the next meeting what this is. That's very cool.
I always have to kick it out of like the private meetings because Zoom automatically applies it.
Okay. Wow. That can be nice because then you don't have to remember it. Then you have to remember to kick it out sometimes. Morning.
Sorry for my delay.
No worries. I've got an HVAC person at my house this morning. So hopefully
no.
nothing is wrong and they will not call me out of this room, but they may.
What
With
did you do to
laughing.
your air conditioner?
Oh, it's just like a preventative every
Mm,
spring and winter check-in. But
got
I
it.
always get very anxious about what's going to be wrong because I'm checking in. But it's gonna be fine. Just so y'all are aware that that's happening this morning. I heard from Sharita, or I guess Sharita sent a message to all of us. Is Ebony gonna be here this morning?
I haven't heard from her. Let me text her.
Okay. Because we need one more for quorum, or we at quorum now?
We've got you, Russ,
And Jonathan.
and Jonathan. So it's what are we? That's like 50%.
Yeah, we're technically
And
at quorum.
Sharita has an excused absence, so that drops you down. So I think you're at a quorum.
Okay, I think that was what I was unsure about with the excused absence. That's helpful. Okay. Yep. So that's
There's Ebony. So
great.
now you definitely are at a quorum.
Great.
Good morning.
Morning,
Morning,
Ebony.
Ebony.
Well, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Welcome. Colin sent our agenda yesterday. And then Russ also sent the notes. Let me for a quick second pull notes up and make sure.
I apologize for the late sending of the agenda.
Well, that's
It was
on me.
ahead of the minutes.
I I told Colin we could meet yesterday, so he got them out very soon after we chatted. So that's on me as well. So we have the September notes. And if folks want to take a second to look over them or have already looked over them, take a motion to approve them when we're ready.
I think I can do this. I'll make a motion that we approve them.
Thanks, Russ, for making a motion. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thanks, Ebony. All right, our September minutes are approved. So we'll move on to our third item, which is setting the October HSAC agenda, and I'll pass it over to Colin.
All right, we have not a whole lot that has to get done this month, so we have some options on what to do. Let me share a screen here. We have Jonathan is on deck for performance management update. I did text Sheldon and I haven't heard back from him because he's been talking about wanting to do kind of an update to the HSAC about their redevelopment plans, but unsure of timing of when he wants to do it. So I've not heard back on that. Eliza and I were talking yesterday about things that we could do or could add to the agenda and came up with things sort of helping to clarify with all these bond projects and affordable housing, reminding people what area median income means, fair market rent, how HCVs work, and how tax credit properties work. Because tax credit properties that are 30 and 60% AMI do not take 30% of your income and apply it to rent. There's a fixed dollar amount for those. And it's very different. And a lot of people get confused thinking that, oh, somebody at 10% AMI can go into a 30% tax credit property and afford the rent, which is just not the case without a voucher. So thinking through sort of helping to reorient and educate folks on what all those acronyms and what the nuances are of those. Also, looking at, Eliza said, there's some things that are percolating in the subcommittees, and I didn't have the information off the top of my head about items that were in performance management that might be worth bubbling up to the full HSAC for discussion. But there's two things in the policy and planning committee where we've got populations that are kind of keeping an eye on and trying to figure out how to solve, the increased number of homeless families and the increase in seniors or those being exited from hospitals that are not appropriate for shelter, and or those who choose not to use their money to go into assisted living or family care homes or other types of housing options, and how do we solve for those cases. We also have some things that Melissa, I think these are from Melissa added in as well. The COC trainings wrap-ups that we just did, all those COC trainings last week, and reminding folks who didn't attend that they're going to need to go get those done if they want to have contracts with us. And obviously we've got our HSAC stipend, which is on our agenda today. If we make a decision or get a survey out. So those are kind of items to think through and what sounds good to the committee at large, or are there things that need to be added to this list that we've forgot about?
Yeah, and just to add those two items in the middle, the AMI and the populations one, those are ideas. So if there are other things that people feel like are important for the group to have discussions about, I'm very open to switching that out. Just
Mhm.
wanted to start somewhere.
I would affirm, I think walking through the AMI, FMR, what all of those mean, and I think also highlighting, Colin, your point is good that a lot of housing that's affordable is not with the set rents. I mean, there's and let me state, there is no way to manage those properties without it being set rent. Like
Mhm.
we don't want to devolve necessarily into a conversation about that.
No, we would
Just that
definitely
it's
not
not
do
really
that.
affordable. So I think that would make good sense. And I don't know at what point I I wonder if an update from community development on um where forever home is. I mean, I think some very public declaration that there is no more money that's not committed or already been spent. So because I think there's the rumblings of conversation in the community, like we need to start getting ready for the next bond fund and what all that needs to include. And so I feel like at some point, somebody from community development needs to come and say very clearly, everything from the last bond is in process. Like there's no more RFPs coming,
Mhm.
any of that. Because I just don't know that most people realize that. So
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Russ. Colin and I had a conversation about the bond. And I think, at least for me, it was helpful to really understand how the bond impacted this team's work. And understanding that piece. And I think this larger AMI conversation also is going to help us understand, like, there's a lot of focus right now on the AMIs and on the LIHTC and how that may be different from what would be helpful to HSAC and to homeless providers. And so how do we delineate the two, understand where the first bond or this housing bond went, and just give people a clearer picture of kind of how that's different? Because I think a lot of energy is around the AMI percentages in areas that don't necessarily impact the populations that our partners are serving.
Yeah, I think that would make good sense. And I think even I actually just had the conversation with Reginald yesterday. The fact that like any property that's 50% AMI or less, if you are a city worker, you will never qualify because the minimum living wage now for the city is what, 1846. I keep getting the numbers transposed. It's 18 something. That puts you over 50% AMI if you're a single individual. So there's in this lost place. So there's just some interesting triggers there, especially with there being, I think talking about our populations and that workforce housing piece. I think workforce housing is coming back as a conversation piece in a healthy way. So, yeah.
But the city workers at 50% AMI wouldn't qualify, but you would possibly qualify for a 60% AMI unit. We'd have to look at the numbers.
Right. But one of the big factors in town historically has been building a lot of 50% AMI.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Yeah.
It is a challenge. And then
I think laying the groundwork for people to understand some of this, because we're going to have some involvement in nudging another bond fund along, bond campaign, referendum, whatever the term.
Yeah. We'll also need to, there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. So it sounds like we want to do, so we want to do a presentation on AMI, FMR, what HCVs do and don't do, what a 30%, 60% AMI is, including kind of those fixed rent amounts, because that's kind of the only place where you actually have a rent control.
Yeah.
There is a fixed dollar amount that you can charge. But if you're in a 30% AMI, you can't afford that rent unless you're at, right? Or if you're not at 30%, you've got to be at least 25 to 29% to scrape by to make that rent amount. Like if you're at 10% AMI, you can't afford a 30% a 30% unit without a housing choice voucher.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and it might be good to give examples of where the 30% AMI has been implemented, because I, I I know that first RFP that went out related to the bond funds was rather vague in terms of like, will you work with the homeless system? Was like the question was something along those lines. I think the second RFP, if I'm not mistaken, was a little bit more focused. So I don't know where there are actually 30% AMI units. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, we
Yeah.
do know that there's a bunch of, not a bunch, but there is a good number of 30% AMI units being developed by the county on the Main Street properties.
Sure. Okay.
Like those, I know have a good number of 30 and 60% in them.
Got it.
Because
Okay.
it's basically the county's controlling that piece. I'd have to go back and find the presentation from Drew.
Yeah.
And it may be worth having the county at some point coming back and giving an update, or
That'd be
whoever
great.
the developer is giving an update of when do those actually start leasing up. And I don't know if the ones right across from Health and Human Services are leasing up yet or not, but there's definitely a parking deck that's being used.
Yeah.
Russ, you also mentioned the housing bond. Do you see that being connected to this presentation or separate from, but would be helpful to be in October, or something that we should do in the near future?
In terms of updating where the last one is, or the
Yeah,
current
just
one?
like giving people some context to where we are with the one, I guess, that we have right now, but all the money is spoken for.
Yeah, I wonder if we could do an invite for Reginald or Matt or somebody to come maybe in November. So that we're kind of building that framework of like, here's what all these here's what all these products are, for lack of a better term. Here's where we are in the current implementation. And then I'm gonna jump ahead and say we probably should have a good conversation about, at some point, any 30% AMI units pretty much are going to require supportive services. So what is the plan for that? I mean, I've yet to run into 30% AMI situations that don't require some kind of ongoing support. I remain ever optimistic. Even if it's just occasional touch and go. But that may need to be on the radar to it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Colin. That way we won't forget for next month.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about as a team and trying to think through, and not for November or December, but talking through possibly doing a state of homelessness address to the joint city county council commissioners in January, February sometime, just sort of going through, here's where we are, here are the challenges, and here's the funding that's going to be required to do something different. And I was talking to Reginald about this a little bit, and there's sort of a finite amount of money, and a lot of the money that we have used is kind of put in place for contracts that we've already put out there for the next 3 years. And if we want to continue doing something or start doing something new, we're going to have to find additional money. And where's that going to come from, and how do we make this work?
Yeah.
This is Jonathan. I really like the idea of a state of the homelessness address to both bodies.
Yeah. So, thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I think that's something, and we got invited with very recently, kind of with very little notice, to come and give an update to the joint city county. And we needed to pass on it due to just, there wasn't enough time to pull it together. So we're kind of there.
Oh, I was thinking of the one from last year where it was like, hey, what are your 3 wishes?
Yeah.
And you had like a month to do
Exactly.
it. That's what I was chuckling about.
Colin, have we ever done something like that before, like a state of homelessness type of reporting to the bodies, elected bodies?
What's that?
Have we ever done this type of like state of homelessness before?
No, not the way I'm thinking.
Okay.
We sort of have done, I did some updates during COVID
Mhm.
to city and county about kind of the state of homelessness and the challenges and what we were seeing and working through and funding and what we were planning to do. There was a good number of that during the COVID outbreak.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I was just curious if there's like if there was some sort of template that we had used in the past, or it sounds like though that you have ideas of what might be really helpful to set the stage.
Yeah, I think sort of walking through, here's sort of doing basically you're doing a gaps analysis. Like, here's how many people are unsheltered, here's how many beds we have, here's what we are able to do during white flag, and even if we stand this up during white flag, here's how many people during the cold weather season have no access to anything. Here's how many people, similar to that coordinated entry evaluation that I submitted last year. It showed that, hey, nine people entered permanent supportive housing over the course of a year, but we've got 50 or 100 people who need permanent supportive housing, and there's just nowhere for them to go.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of painting the picture. This is what we've got, and if we're comfortable with what we've got, then great, we'll keep doing exactly what we're doing. But if there's a desire to do something different or try and change, then this is kind of the amount of money it would take to house 10 more people in permanent supportive housing, and this is what that cost is. This is what the cost would be to clear the deck, if you will, for permanent supportive housing, and sort of say, okay, here's what it is. But once you clear it, you're going to have another, that's going to take care of this for a year in perpetuity. But next year, you're going to have a new group of people who qualify as permanent, needing permanent supportive housing. So are you going to keep investing more and more money each year to try and meet the need? Or is there just going to be sort of we're comfortable with this number, this percentage of people not having access to housing?
Yeah. Hopefully not that part.
Well, even if you make housing available, there are going to be some people who are not going to want it, or even if they want it, they may not be able to maintain it, even if all the rent is paid on a regular basis, just due to lease violations, behavioral issues, and other things that sometimes get in the way.
Yeah.
I wonder in terms of timing. I mean, we'll have a new city council set up by what, December? I can't remember when the commissioners change happens, but it's not too far off. We'd also talked about going back once pit count results are out, because that's one of the easiest things for people to get their minds around. I mean, is there value in doing this relative to when we have pit count numbers?
Well, we were talking like the pit count won't be ready until spring, and we were talking internally. We would have our by January, February, we would have our system analysis numbers for the year that ended September 30th, 2022 or 2023. So we'd be able to talk about numbers of people assisted through street outreach and emergency shelter in the last federal fiscal year. We may not have the full pit count finalized to go public with that quickly, because obviously we don't do the pit count until the very end of January.
Right.
So, you'd be looking at probably like a March timeframe. And like I said, all of this is also contingent on when and what the people way above my pay grade determine is a good timing for this type of thing. So it could
Sure.
very well be in that March-April timeframe.
Okay.
Some of it's going to have to come sooner than that, just looking at the budget process, that they'll probably need to be.
Oh, that's a really good point.
So
Yeah.
some of these pieces may need to trickle in at various levels,
Right.
you
Right.
know, not, I don't want to say now, but now.
I do hope when we do a presentation, I mean, the fact that the HSAC exists is always good. I definitely think we want to make sure that as many providers as possible know when you're doing it, so
Mhm.
we can be in the audience kind of backing you up, but also to make sure the chair is part of the presentation, because I think that reinforces the community part of it. Not that you all aren't fully capable staff, but it does send a different message a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to do what I need to do to support, but I
Mhm.
agree that definitely the partners like will want to be there, will want to be aware. So as
Mhm.
this elevates and we figure out kind of where it might land in the year, let's keep talking about it so that people can be prepared to support.
Okay.
Great.
All right, so we'll do the AMI FMR presentation. We'll do the quarterly report. If Sheldon wants to do a UMD, oh, well, we've got to do the HSAC stipend. What we're going to do with that $1,000? Do we want to get that decision made?
Yeah, so was one of the options for that we mentioned last time was gathering the group to pass out the books,
Mhm.
and gathering would be that cost, right?
Yes, sort of food and stuff.
Okay, so I think what we had said is, and I think it's on our agenda, is potentially sending out a survey with 3 options, having people vote.
Mhm.
So if we can decide on those options today, we could do it that way. But if we're just bringing forward one recommendation, then I think we would just ask the full HSAC to vote on that one recommendation. So I think it might just be a reminder of please take the survey, or it might be a discussion, is what I kind of understood it to be.
Okay, so we can get a survey out maybe early next week and give people a week to respond and bring back the results of that to the HSAC for a vote based on, here are the 3 things that came out. Here's what folks came on. Do you want to approve majority rule?
Yeah, that sounds right to me, as long as we have enough options to put into a survey, which I think is further on our agenda today.
Okay. So I'm going to put this here, vote to approve. All right, so if we don't come up with enough, if we don't come up with other things to add besides the social gathering with food, we'll just sort of say, here's the recommendation of the HSAC, of the executive committee, and we'll vote on that.
Yeah, that sounds
Okay.
right to me. We
That
gave
works.
people a chance to bring up other ideas and to run other things that came up.
And then do we want to move this populations to watch? I'll just move it down to November for now, because it's kind of very, very, very loosely thought out. And if we're doing the other piece on affordable housing, what do all these things mean? Well, we can bump that just so we don't lose it.
Can we add on that list for the future before I forget? Since you have a full team now, one of these months where there's not a lot on the schedule, could we do like a meet the team and everyone talk about, their journey to doing this, like why they do this work, what part of things they're doing and how it's changing. I mean, I think people are excited and to be supportive. And I just thought sometime, not to call you all filler, but like sometime when there's time,
Sure.
being able to sort of meet and us all connect in our heads. Okay, Anthony's doing this and Jeffrey's doing this and Melissa's doing this. Because I know you're making a lot of really good movement forward. And so for everyone able to kind of just have a moment to celebrate that with you, that you have a team.
I do have a team, and we are down a team member now. Well, not yet.
Let's stay positive, Colin. Let's stay positive.
Effective Monday. My whole team is now will be minus one person. One of our team members left my team.
Oh.
So Ruby has left our team and is moving over to the compliance team. So she's not leaving the city. She's moving up in the world and getting a promotion, which is good for her and it's sad for us. But we told her she's an honorary homeless team member for life, and she can come join our team anytime she likes. So we will be down that position, and I'm working on the job description to get it posted to refill that position. So,
Very happy for Ruby getting a promotion. That's awesome. And we'll miss her. And also, I still think it's a great idea that Russ shared, is just even with who you all have, understanding everybody's role, because I know you all are doing a lot that we don't see, and I think it's just helpful to understand that.
Yeah, and I think we probably should add something to the agenda to let the full HSEC know that Ruby has left the team. So we should probably just put an informational piece on here, because a lot of people have, Ruby's been there and done a lot for the HSEC for a few years. So
Yeah.
see if I can get her to come to the meeting so folks can say hello. Okay. All right, so I think we got a pretty good agenda set up here.
Colin, I have a question.
Yes.
I don't see it anymore. So I think you erased it, but I wanted to know if we could talk a little bit. I can't remember if it was here or at our policy and planning committee meeting. You mentioned something about the seniors and how that number has increased. So you're gonna move that? Okay, sorry, wasn't.
No, you're good. You're good.
Move it to November.
Yeah, and thinking it was kind of something that Eliza and I were talking about, and it was kind of loosely thought out, and just something that might be worth percolating up. And as we're seeing more families experiencing homelessness, sort of bringing some of these trends to the full HSAC attention, so that more than just policy and planning and more than just performance management are aware of and looking at them. But it's sort of like hey, let's have a discussion about this, and what might be some other ideas that we can take back. And when we percolate those up, maybe we'll be able to also bring in some of the lived experience insights on that as well. So I think there's a lot of things that could be done with that could be a really good use of an HSAC meeting if others agree.
Yeah.
And if those were discussions at policy and planning, I'd love for those discussions to kind of drive what bubbles up to the bigger group. So if there are things, Ebony, that feel like should be a part of that presentation, that you could kind of guide it, since it's loose now, like let's figure that out so we can make sure that we're highlighting the things that felt important to those conversations y'all were having.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Great.
So we got a good agenda here. And we can move on to your next item, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Colin. Okay, our next item is book distribution plan and plan for the 1,000. from the HSAC allocation. So we have purchased books from last year, and we have a new allocation of funds for this year. In our last exec meeting, I think we had a few ideas that were discussed. It felt like what elevated to the top was bringing HSAC membership together to do like a relational gathering, having the books available there for people to take. So I think we can circle back and see if there are other ideas that members have, or that exec team has, are ideas from our last conversation that also feel like we want to have them as a part of a survey that could go out to membership to help us understand where folks might be lying on how they want to move forward. Yes, I don't know who that is behind the internet. I think that might be Melissa.
That's me. Sorry.
No, you're good. I looked at everyone else's names. I was like, that's Melissa.
I wanted to give context because I know when we talked about it in the larger HSAC meeting, there were questions about like what can we use these for, and I did ask for clarification from the city clerk's office in preparation for this meeting, and they did specify that it absolutely needs to be used on the HSAC as a group. So it needs to be used on the group specifically. They gave me examples that other committees have done. For example, like there are some committees that use it for meal allotments for all of their in-person meetings. And so they'll have like small like hors d'oeuvres or something like that for their meetings, and they've done that. Some people have done trainings and they've paid for special training for their committees. They've done retreats, which is kind of like what we're talking about, where they would have like food present and they would pay for additional items for like retreat items and team building for their committee members. And then books, we're not the only ones who did books last year. Another committee also chose to do books to help assist with the work that they were talking about. And then they said that if there are other options that come about that people still have questions about, they're happy to clarify. If there are specific suggestions that we're unsure will be covered.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Melissa. As you were talking, I was also remembering one of the pieces that came up is an orientation. I don't know how many people that are members on HSAC have had an orientation. And I think for me, this kind of goes back to the conversation we were having in our last exec around like a flow chart and understanding like what are the major pieces of our work and the dollars. And that might be a helpful orientation piece for new people.
I like the idea. Go ahead, Evan. Sorry.
No, I was just agreeing. I like the idea. That's it.
I think, yeah, I think the kind of reorienting might be good after all this time. I think the piece we have to figure out is how when we could do it relative to the work we're going to have to do to get like a really good I'm thinking PowerPoint in my head, but like a really good onboarding PowerPoint, and just the content so that we have something going forward. It really orients to the whole system, if that makes sense. Yeah. We just have to use it by June 30th, is that right?
Yes.
Right.
When we talk about an orientation, I think there was a couple in person when I was coming on HSAC, and then it switched to virtual, and the one I ended up doing was virtual, and it was like 2 hours. So I'm just curious too about, I think there's an element of gathering people and having time to like mingle that is helpful as well. And so just curious about what y'all would think about stacking those things together or making it a shorter orientation piece that's specific to a couple things we identify that would be really helpful for folks.
Could we, so we're only talking about the actual HSAC members, right? Okay.
Mhm.
Could we run a bus and
Hmm.
design programming for while we're on the bus and go around town and show people some of these sites? Or, I mean, a lot of it you can just walk
Yeah.
around downtown. I mean, I think we even designed like a walking tour downtown. You can cover most of it in an hour and a half. But if we could get people on a like captive together for a couple hours, see the sites and do some of that debriefing, and maybe lots of snacks at the end to go over some pieces. We might be able to help really orient people to what's going on and where people are, and like we designed a version of this internally to use. I don't mind pulling it out in terms of like at least having a little bit of a framework of some of the sites, but I mean any almost anything that's we could think about the sector and the partners and just do as much as we possibly could. I mean, I know not everybody can take this.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, it lands differently when you actually get to go somewhere.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really like that idea. The only thing to keep in mind though is the size of our HSAC. Our HSAC is quite large compared to others. I think if we were doing like a mini bus, it would be affordable, but most like actual buses that would hold our full HSAC would be upwards of like $1,000. So it would go beyond our budget for just the bus rental.
And what's our Melissa? What's our actual number if we had like actual HSAC plus the
Staff.
city staff? So you all can
We're-
ride behind in a caravan.
Right, we're at over 30 if we include staff and HSAC members.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so you need a full bus.
Yeah,
Well,
and
and there's those buses over at. I am tired today. I'm wanting to say scavenger hunt, scrap exchange, that say Greenway or something on them, that I think are a little bit more laid back than some of the executive coach options. Just try,
Russ, I was just gonna say, I think the transportation system might be interested in understanding what we're doing and might partner with us on that. And they may even provide a bus at no cost if they know what we're doing.
that's a great. In fact, we've done a lot with Go Triangle, not Go Durham, but Go Triangle. I bet you're right. That's a terrific idea.
yeah, and I don't know all the details I could find out. I know that Bragtown Community Association have done transportation type tours in Bragtown area the last couple of years, and I'm not sure who their contact was, but I mean, the community association was not paying for a bus.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think there are ways, and I can ask kind of who their contacts were if that's helpful.
Yeah.
So does it feel like we want to offer those two options then in a survey? One, or do we need to figure out the finances on the bus before we offer that as a option?
I feel like one way or another we could work out a bus, even if it was
Right.
two if we had to borrow two church buses.
Yeah.
We could manage.
Yeah.
Somewhere there's a church with a bus that's just waiting for Sunday. So I think we could creatively find a way. And I really like Anthony's idea.
We could even talk about carpooling as an option if a bus wasn't an option.
Yeah.
So I still like the idea a lot. I think we should definitely keep it. I'll reach out to Diana and Paola at the city clerk's office too, just in case they have some ideas. Because looking at the city clerk's website, it looks like there are some transportation options. So let me see if I can get a little bit more information, but I definitely don't want to take that option off the table.
And does the county provide any kind of stipend for us? I mean, can we pool resources since we're kind of a city and a county group?
I believe they provide stipends for like the appointed members, but I they did not provide one for the larger HSAC group.
Okay. We'll have to remember that for future years.
Great. So it sounds like we really like this bus idea. We're going to do a little bit more digging. The other idea that's elevated is gathering over food, more relational, and doing some sort of orientation presentation rather than like visually. So once we have more clarity on the bus, we'll send a survey out to HSAC membership, and then they can vote to give us an idea. Or does it just make sense to just not do the survey and bring those two ideas to the next meeting and let us take a vote there?
I think assuming that we can figure something out with the busing option that would be low cost or even no cost, hopefully, keeping my fingers crossed, then I don't see a reason why we couldn't lump all of the ideas into a 1 day retreat and have like, where we go out and actually look at the area, but then we still hold an orientation and have like a gathering, especially if we are able to figure out a bus situation that doesn't cost directly from the stipend, because then we'd be able to do some of those other elements that we've talked about too, and just hopefully have everyone commit to 1 day that they can all gather.
Okay, yeah. I guess I would be curious about what people's, if that would be possible for people's scheduling for a full day. So
Could we brown bag on the bus? If we're, and maybe wrap it around lunch, do it midday, where we're doing the tour on the bus and just have brown bag if we're able to accommodate the cost of the bus being, maybe given to us gratis. That way it would just be a few hours if you could wrap around the middle of the day. And
Mhm.
not in the middle.
yeah. Yeah, I just don't have a sense of the group's availability for a full day. That's my only question.
Well, maybe that's something that we bring up as part, maybe we don't do a survey. We bring this up in the HSAC and do like a live poll. I can do a whole day, I can do 4 hours. I can do 2 hours. And
Great.
then there's probably going to be a whole bunch of people who can't do a full day and they're going to leave anyway.
Yeah.
But if we know kind of how many, we can kind of structure, if we want to do a full day and most people want that option, we can kind of prioritize. Here's the most important stuff we're doing at this time. Not that it's not all important, but maybe the tours in the afternoon and the orientation and the other things that are really critical for understanding stuff is when most people can be there, and the tour might be, small. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could we like plan in advance even this? Because I think a lot of people, if they hear full day, they think 9 to 5. I mean, my guess is we're talking about 9:30 to 2:30. And I think if we throw out a time like that, then anybody transporting children to or from school will suddenly become available. So if we, gave it we're going to start after school starts, we're going to be done before school stops, for those that affects. And that's, that seems like a pretty good time commitment.
Great.
Because if we can get the right busing situation, even if we have to divide up a couple of us, we can be chatting while we're riding and providing some of the content while we move.
I like it. I can even create like some kind of doodle poll just to also apply to like what Colin said, so that if everyone can't make it even for that, partial day commitment, then at least we can prioritize certain items based on the most availability. Do we want to talk about some days now as an exec committee to go ahead and put on that poll? That way, because I don't want to just put random days there on the poll. So if you guys have some suggestions, I can go off of that.
I think going back to what Russ had shared earlier around like, what's the timeline to prepare presentations? Like, I think we want to make sure we've got that figured out. I don't want us to feel like we're rushing to create just because we've picked this date. I'm not in a huge rush to have this soon. I just want to make sure that like we feel good about the content and the organizational piece, and not feel like we're rushing and then thinking about like all the other things that y'all have going on too.
We could plan for not necessarily anything this calendar year, but something January, February. I know us as like a COC, as lead agency, we should be wrapped up with a lot of our trainings in January because that's when we're requiring that all of our providers complete all their trainings. And I know we still have like a coordinated entry training to work out. So I'm thinking like if we do something in January, February, that should give all of us ample time to kind of plan, coordinate, and hopefully gather the right information that we need to figure out, busing and whatnot.
And I mean, to add to that, and I'm going to nudge it back a little. We've got pit count in January, and I think we want to and we'll make an announcement about this in the meeting. Like, we need that people get that on their calendar, because we really do need people. This group definitely need to prioritize helping in some way with pit count if possible. So if we do that end of January, I mean, we're kind of already going to push that hopefully in a way that sounds like a commitment. And then if we could look maybe late February, I'm wondering, or early March. I don't know how that fits with, because I'm wondering if there's a way to do it so that like could we do it in place of one of our meetings so folks feel like I usually give an hour and a half. This time they're asking me for 5, so really it's only another 3.5 hours. I don't know if that's silly or not, but yeah. But I don't know if there's I can't remember off the top of my head if there's things we're always like needing to approve in February or March that we need to be careful of. Yeah.
The only thing I would be mindful of is that our meetings are considered public versus a retreat would be specific to just the HSAC. So I don't necessarily think that we should put it in place of our meeting because we wouldn't be inviting the general public to our retreat.
Good point.
But I do like the idea of late February, March, because PIT is going to be a huge undertaking, and we definitely want people to prioritize that in January. So, yeah, I think late February, early March would be a better option.
Okay, so I'm looking at time. Maybe if we've identified a range, February, March, it makes sense. Maybe y'all look at some dates and send them to exec, and then we can keep the conversation going that way instead of looking at calendars right now. The other thing I'm thinking about with what Russ mentioned is instead of a replacement, Melissa, like you shared, is maybe we just make sure our meeting that month is shorter. Like we're still meeting, we're just not going to put a lot on the agenda, and it's a short meeting. So we can do both.
Or you pick the same day you have a meeting and you do your retreat the morning and do your meeting closes it out. And that way people already have a date on their calendar. They're planning to do HSAC in the afternoon. I mean, it's a longer day, but if we're talking 9:30 to 2, you would get done and have a little bit of a break before the 3 o'clock HSAC meeting.
I think the only thing to Melissa's point, I think that would get dicey with people feeling like they were invited apart, but not. It sounds logical, but I just, yeah.
No, because you're doing the HSAC retreat, which is not a public meeting. And then you're doing the public meeting at the end of the day that everybody's already invited to because it's a standing meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's another, like we're asking about surveying maybe during the HSAC meeting next month or this month. That's another option. is like 9 to 2. And then there's a second question around, would it be okay to do it on the day of our HSAC meeting and have it in the afternoon, or would you prefer it to be a different day? Maybe that's a secondary question. All right. Are we good? Should we move on to the next item? That was a good discussion. I'm excited about this bus idea. I think it's great. Thanks, Russ, for bringing that up. Anthony has a lived experience work group update.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. As you know, we mentioned let me go back a little bit for context. As part of the collaborative application every year, this year we took a look at what HUD says about the involvement of people with lived experience throughout the system, and all of the places where they should be included as part of decision making. So we, thanks to Colin, we were able to put together what we call the Lived Experience Advisors Work Group. And so we call it the LEAD Work Group. LEAD is Lived Experience Advisors. We put out an all call throughout the by name list where many of the providing organizations attend. And we got some great participation from a variety of organizations. Our first listening session was held September 14th with 6, I call them leaders, as just a acronym for who they are. And a lot of good things came out of that initial meeting. One, we have decided that the core group of leaders will be staff of providers with lived experience. It just makes sense because otherwise we'd be having to worry about a group that will be more transient participating, as well as we would have to worry about compensation for people that were participating after hours or any other type framework. So the core group will be staff with lived experience. So Russ and others, if you're running organizations that have allowed us to have a staff, thank you so much. We appreciate it. It was a very good meeting. A lot of good came out of it. First of all, I'll tell you a little bit about the purpose. The purpose is for us as the lead agency to make sure that they are involved throughout the system to provide information, to make improvements, and to drive change in our system performance, right? We also want to engage this group to collaboratively create programs, policies, and procedures to access professional development opportunities, so that there's a bigger mission that we're building around it in hopes that the involvement from this group will really shine. So we had our first meeting. They identified 5 priorities that they want to work on. Happy to share them. Not really important in this venue. And they also identified voices that were missing at the table. And so one of those, that because of those voices that were missing, we have now taken the group up to 9 to 10 slots. One of those voices that was missing was the veterans. So we have a Durham VA representative now. Another voice that's missing is the voice of a youth. So we are actively looking for a youth voice at the table. There are also going to be policy reviews that we do before the end of this year, actually within the next 30 days. Those are the coordinated entry handbook, the grievance policy, and the housing barrier assessment. So these are being driven by staff on our team. However, we are involving the lived experience work group and helping to think through those revisions and to provide any information that might influence the final product and the outcome. So just wanted to give you guys the heads up as to who this group is, what we're doing. We're also considering other places for them to be involved. Such as, for example, if they're aware, one of the places that we haven't explored, and Lloyd and I have been talking about it, is youth and unsheltered youth and those that may be impacted, but for some reason we can't find them during pit count to justify higher numbers of youth unsheltered. So just thinking about ways of, asking this group, for ideas and other places where we might make a big difference. That's it. One of the other things that we will do, as I mentioned this as a core work group, there will be expanded listening sessions deployed. The heart team is already deploying expanded listening sessions with the unsheltered, and they're compensating them for it. So we're just sort of like letting heart do what they do, and we're going to ride the coattails and count those surveys as part of our listening, because heart has agreed to share the information from those surveys. So that's what we're up to. I'm happy to entertain any questions. And Colin, did I say everything we needed to say about this? Perfect. Okay. So any questions you guys have, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you. And Russ, specifically for Housing for New Hope, I know we lost your representative who went to another organization. So I did talk to Shantae yesterday to see if we can start the process of having representation from your group again, just so you know.
Thanks for that update, Anthony. I think that's so important to make sure those voices are heard. I'm excited that group is meeting.
Thank
And
you.
that they will inform our work in some strategic ways.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, hearing no other questions, the last thing on our agenda, we have these two outstanding conversations that we can, pick kind of one to talk about, or maybe have some comments, brief comments for both. I know this meeting normally has ended 11, so here we are again past 11, but one is the Jamboard survey. We haven't really decided what to do with that yet. Last session, we sent, following our meeting, the results of that to the group. And the other conversation is the one around the governance document. We started talking a little bit in our last meeting about ratios. And in the interim, there's also been a question from performance management, but it's good for us all to kind of think about our governance charter and thinking about potentially co-chairs. What could that look like? I think the larger question there is, how do we set ourselves up for transitions better so that whether it's on executive team or on our committees, we're really helping people flow through, and that we can set ourselves up for success in those transitions. So one is Jamboard, the other is this governance document. Do y'all want to discuss one or the other over the other, or have thoughts on one that we'd like to just discuss today?
Or do we want to, so we lost Russ and we're missing Sharita. So I don't know that we'd be able to arrive at a decision today.
Yeah.
Maybe another option, Eliza, would be you and I could talk and send some thoughts out so we could at least get, instead of starting with a blank wall, there's at least something on the wall to respond or react to. I don't know if that might help, and then sort of really target some specific time and make sure we're intentional at our November meeting to carve out a solid 45 minutes to work on either or both of these. I'm curious as to what you and Ebony and Jonathan think would be most useful.
This is Jonathan. I'm sorry. I don't think my comment made it through. I think I was still muted, but since I was the one who raised the question about possibly having at least a co-chair as part of the subcommittee leadership, I would certainly love to talk about that today. But I did catch the last part there about Colin acknowledging that we are missing one of our other subcommittee chairs. So, maybe now may or may not be the best time to have that conversation. But that's the one I'm particularly interested in today.
Yeah. Well, I think, Jonathan, it might be helpful if you offer the group context, and then maybe because not everyone is here, at least that folks that are here can hear that, or we'll be able to go back and hear it, and then we can continue the conversation in our next meeting and make it the, one of the first items we talk about, and make sure that we've got more folks. And at that point, also Colin and I could work on some ideas from what you've shared. Does that sound all right?
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. So at present, I am the performance committee chairperson. This is my 4th year going on it. This past year, it was pretty much me running the committee. We did briefly have 2 secretaries, but both have since left the committee. And so I brought up this concern for a couple of reasons. One is because I needed some additional support. But the other is that at least, until recently, there hasn't really been anyone else in sight who has expressed interest or maybe even has felt potentially ready to take over this committee. And unfortunately, my commitments are becoming such that, I cannot always make every performance management subcommittee meeting. And so I would love to have somebody else who's able to, step up in my spot, and perhaps with the longer term goal of being able to assume the chair position when they're ready at the beginning of the next HSAC year. The good news, at least, is that I have had one person on the committee step up and say, yes, I'm happy to be secretary this year. And then we do have another person who said they were not able to commit to being chair of the committee on their own, but could certainly was interested in possibly being co-chair. So that's a little bit of context there, and happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
If I remember correctly, we ran into this problem a few years ago, Jonathan, with the way the governance was structured. Only a chair could call a meeting to order, and we ran into problems because when the chair wasn't there, the meeting couldn't get called to order. And I think the governance charter got amended, or something got put in place to allow the secretary to act kind of as the co-chair in the event that the chair was absent.
Okay.
That may be like, granted, we don't have a secretary in any of our committees right now, except for exec and HSAC. That may be.
Well, we do have one for performance management now.
You do?
Addison. Yes.
Okay. So that may be like a short-term fix while we try and figure out how to make whether or not the co-chair works, and then maybe figure out a secretary who could fill in for that. And if the secretary had to step in to be chair for a meeting, or do those things, then obviously the note-taking would have to fall to probably CDD staff or something along those lines. Not ideal,
Yeah,
but
it's pretty tough to.
Yeah,
it's pretty tough to chair a meeting and do the minutes at the same time.
It is. It is.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's what we would do is this, like, if you had to be out for whatever, a week or two because you're on vacation, or trainings or other things, we could coordinate you, staff, and the secretary to make sure that the secretary had what they needed to run the meeting. And then CDD staff would be able to step in and do the secretary duties for that one meeting. And then we would return to normal order of business in the next meeting when everybody's back. And then maybe perhaps what we look at is kind of like a succession plan, that looking at the governance document that sort of says, okay, here's how long a chair can be in place, because that then forces some movement in the system, because right now you can be chair for life. And I'm grateful for you and Sharita being chairs, but I also want to respect the fact that you probably don't want to be chairs for life, and feel trapped in this position because nobody else will do it. But if we sort of do there's a term limit and you can serve X number of terms, which sort of gives you a sunset date, and then the secretary would assume the role at a later date, or a new vote would happen. It sort of forces the change and sort of keeps everybody fresh, and from burning any one person out from having to be chair for 18 years.
Well, I'm only on 4, so.
No, I know,
yeah,
but with the way we're going, you might be in it for 18 years, or you might retire and be coming out of retirement to keep chairing the committee, Jonathan.
I like these ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And I think the one thing I'm kind of sitting with is like what the situation that we're in is that the secretary is willing to be the secretary, and there's another person in the solution who has said, like, I can be a co-chair, but isn't the secretary. So maybe I think it's really helpful to kind of understand this situation, to think about how we might be able to solve for something like this. Also knowing that it can be tricky for a secretary to move into the chair when the chair can't be there, and then there's work being put on community development. So I think it's really helpful to understand the nuances of the situation, and then we can keep thinking about how we might be able to plan for something that includes this other person who said, I'm willing to be a co-chair, but they aren't the secretary. Because I feel like we're missing out on some capacity there, that people have said, I'm willing to do something, but in our current model, we're not really tapping into that resource that someone has said, I'm willing to do this. So I think that is something that I'm kind of sitting with in this scenario.
And here's a good example of this. So take November, for example. I already know that I cannot chair November's meeting because it conflicts with our Veterans Day program. So we have a secretary, and I have a colleague who is not the secretary on there, Tracy, who has chaired meetings for me in the past. And so ideally, it would be great for her to be able to slide in, and of course I'd have to check this out with her for November, but for her to slide in and chair that meeting while Shantae can still stay as secretary and take notes, because this is even her first month as secretary. So, she's working on her first set of meetings, and then being thrown in to go ahead and have to chair a meeting, may or may not be a lot for her. But that's a really good example of how, my colleague Tracy could potentially step in, without adding to the workload of community development.
Yeah.
And
And
that's,
sorry,
go ahead, Eliza.
No, I just think something else that came up in conversation over email, Jonathan, when you first emailed, was that it doesn't specifically say in the charter, we can't do this, but it also doesn't say that we can. So I'm curious about, like, I think in other committees, like the openness to interpretation, and like, I think for me, if people are comfortable and it's going to help us and it's going to make more sense, and I have the ability to make that interpretation, like, that's something that I think we should talk about.
we've had similar challenges with policy and planning, with Sharita being out. And while she's been out, I just stepped in and sort of ran the meetings in her absence as staff. So I think getting to a place where we have a consistent and formal, this is what we're going to do when the chair is out. That way it's consistent. It's, Lloyd, is it Colin and Lloyd step in and run the meetings? Is it a co-chair? Is it a vice chair? Is it a secretary? I think it is something that we really do need to find the solution that we can be consistent on across the platforms and the committees.
So I'm hearing that Jonathan brought up this issue for November. And so it sounds like the solution that's on the table right now is that community development could step in and support, unless we continue having a conversation and there's a way for us to put Tracy in as an alternative or a co-chair before that. Is that right?
That's correct from my end.
Colin, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, what I would say is, until we have a formal decision made, I would defer to Jonathan and sort of let, follow the path that's been done in the past. And
Okay.
I think it works. It solves the meeting. It solves the challenge that we have, is having somebody to facilitate the meeting. And it's what we've done in the past. So it's not like we're trying to create something new 4 weeks before a meeting and trying to get a policy. Because I think when we're talking about what are we going to do long term, we're not going to solve it in the next 13 minutes and get a governance charter or get a decision made necessarily in 13 minutes. And, we've talked through a couple different ideas here, and I think we just need to look at it. And given that you're going to be out, if you can find somebody to substitute to run the meeting, I think that's the best we can do at this point in time, and give ourselves some time to come up with what is the best long-term solution that's sustainable. And we can actually map it out and make sure that, we may solve the challenge for performance management, but that might not meet the same thing on policy and planning. And we may be doing ourselves a disservice of not having Sharita here to weigh in on her thoughts. So I think at this point, my recommendation would be, let's go with what we've done in the past. Jonathan, find somebody to cover for you. If you can't, then we can do what policy and planning's done, where I've stepped in, and, Lloyd or Anthony can step in and chair the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And then we, kind of come back with, all right, here, let's put some stuff on paper and sort of say, here are the options, here are the pros and cons to each of these. And then as a committee, make a decision.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes sense. I definitely would love to hear Sharita's thoughts as well. I think the benefits of having another committee member step in is, certainly leadership development and potential succession development. But, I know over the years on HSAC, one of the frequent critiques is often that community development kind of dictates everything. And so I think, by having another committee member step in, even if we don't quite have, the bigger picture figured out yet, I think kind of takes some of that continued critique off of you guys and gals.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Jonathan. I think you're right. I think to the greatest extent we can, keeping CDD staff out of running meetings is probably the better thing to do. and maybe it's staff become the last resort. And yeah, but if you've got somebody who can run the November meeting, I'd say move forward with that as we put together the plan to figure out how do we cover chair being absent so that the secretary is not having to run the meeting and do minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think that sounds, very reasonable for now, and hopefully we can figure out something more long-term that's in the best interest of all parties.
Yeah. And we can, maybe it'd be worth having a small meeting, Eliza and the chairs of the two committees and me, perhaps just a small meeting to sort of find a time where the four of us can kind of noodle through what are some possible options and then come back and make a recommendation to the full executive committee.
Great. Yes, that sounds great.
I'd be happy to be part of that and to help.
Because I think it's going to be more than, I think it'll be at least an hour discussion. We don't want to use an entire executive committee to figure out this one thing. I think it's better to have a separate meeting and come back with a recommendation that we could make a decision on in 10 or 15 minutes.
Great. So I think that
sounds great.
All right.
yeah, so that's then 2 follow-ups for us, Colin. We'll meet and talk about Jamboard, have a recommendation to bring forward in our next exec, and we'll set up that meeting with Jonathan and Sharita and have a recommendation to bring forward, and hopefully that'll keep us moving on these items.
That'll work. And we can maybe also come back with a recommendation on ratios of that 3-to-1 with the HSAC members, and if there's a thought about that.
That would be another topic. I think that would be great to include Jonathan and Sharita in. Great.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Sounds like we feel good about that. That is the end of our agenda. So I will take a motion to adjourn.
Really
I move
quickly,
that we
I was
adjourn,
just-
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, sorry. I was just I was DMing you, Colin, about we will have a new vacancy for city clerk. I don't know if Colin wants to share specifics, but just wanted to keep that in mind, that there will be a faith community seat open. I know, Ebony, in the past in policy and planning meetings, you had talked about wanting to involve the faith community more. So I just wanted to make all of you aware that that seat will be open. That way, if there are interested parties, if you want to send them my way or to the city clerk's office, I can let them know what the next steps would be for applying.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. Any other announcements for the good of the group? Okay, I think I heard a motion from Jonathan earlier, so do I have a second?
It would have to be Ebony is the only one left who can second it.
I said,
Ebony, thanks, Colin.
All right.
All
Have
right,
a good
thanks,
one,
everybody.
everyone. Thanks, all. Appreciate you.
Everyone.
All right. Bye.